Around a few months ago, in April, March, I read an article in Bloomberg that was mentioning that by 2030, 20% of the energy usage in the world will be by IT systems. So it was a shocking number because if you look at the amount of energy usage of the transportation industry right now, it is around 30%. So I was thinking that, so I'm working on an industry that is producing a lot of emissions, because energy usage is one of the main producers of emissions. So that was a shocking to me. That was a shocking fact to me. And when I learned about that, I started to think about this: that is there any way to reduce the emissions of software platforms? After reading these things, I started doing some research to understand that is there any way to measure the amount of CO2 emissions that software platforms produce? And unfortunately, I couldn't find anything. So I decided to basically do the research myself. And then a few weeks ago, the result of the research was published in IEEE. So it's basically a framework that allows people to measure the amount of CO2 emissions that their software platform generates. The idea is relatively simple. The idea is that you can estimate the amount of resources that you require to handle a specific workload using a specific technology, and then you can, using some public data sets, you can measure the amount of CO2s that should have been produced for production of those resources, and the amount of CO2 that those components produce when they are running in data centers. So, and then you sum them up together, and then you can calculate the amount of emissions that different software technologies are producing. And then you can use that as a metric for selecting different software technologies. So that was the idea of the IEEE paper that I've worked on in the past few months. I think that it is going to become even more interesting in the years to come, because until now, measuring the amount of CO2 emissions was kind of not that popular, but all of the major cloud providers has already started to report back how much CO2 emission an account has produced. So if you are a company owner, you can go to the dashboard of your AWS or GCP or Azure and look at the amount of CO2 emissions that your usage produced. But none of those cloud providers are giving you any calculator that you can estimate that how much carbon emissions you're gonna produce in the future, right? They are just telling you that, in the past 6 months or in the past 3 months you produced this much CO2 emissions. So basically this work allows the business owners to estimate how much CO2 emissions they are going to produce and making decisions that help them to reduce those CO2 emissions. Because if you want to do an engineering work, you always have to be able to measure something and estimate something. If you cannot do that, it's just not going to work. So this research that I've done, helping people to do that kind of estimation. As we are moving to greener sources of energy, to solar, to wind, that are not producing as much CO2, is it still a valid concern? So there are two sides to this. First one is that no source of energy is emission-free. So all the sources of energy produce emissions. Some of them more, some of them less. And then moving forward, we are always increasing the amount of energy that we are using. So that footprint is already increasing. So we have to use all of the levers that we have to reduce the amount of CO2. So energy providers have to focus on this to make their energies clean. But the energy consumers have to also look into the ways that they can reduce the amount of energy that they are producing. So that's the first side of it. The second side of it is that I think everybody's responsible. You cannot just say that this is the responsibility of the energy producer to reduce their emissions. It's responsibility of the energy consumer as well. It's a little bit hypocritical to say that you reduce it, but we do whatever that we want. So I think that everybody has to pay their dividends. So the framework itself doesn't do any estimation, right? I'm relying on estimation data that I'm basically got from the internet. Good people of internet did some estimations for the amount of emissions that AWS resources produce, and I'm relying on those. I read those articles and I believe that those estimations are pretty accurate. But I don't know if you, attach it back to the end of the hose pipe that is coming out of AWS, it might be different, right? But the point is that I'm using this estimation for comparison, right? So if there's an error, that error exists in all of the estimations that I do. So if I'm getting to the point that I'm saying that this technology is producing 5 times more emissions, it is going to be 5 times more. By kilograms, possibly not accurate, but the ratio, I believe that ratio is going to remain accurate. This is kind of related to the company that I've worked for, Aerospike. Aerospike created this database that is super efficient. It is 5 times more efficient than similar databases that I worked with. I've been working in the database industry for a number of years. I've worked with most famous database technologies that are out there, and Aerospike is 5 times faster than all of them. And if you think about it, in computers, when something is faster, it means that it's using fewer instructions to basically fulfill the task. So if you can reduce the number of your instructions by 5 times, it also means that you can increase the throughput of your CPU by 5 times. And in turn, you can reduce the amount of resources that you use by 5 times. So unlike most other industries that efficiency usually mean more expensive, in IT industry, more efficient means cheaper. Because more efficient means fewer instructions means less resources, and less resources also mean less emission. So basically that's how it works. Aerospike is an efficient database, and because of that, we can reduce the amount of emissions that companies are generating. So in the research that I've done, I did a benchmark between Aerospike and another famous database technology. So the amount of savings of carbon emissions that you can do with Aerospike against that technology is around 500 tons. So 500 tons of emissions per petabyte of data over a year. And 500 tons, in a scale of global scale, it might not be that much, but it is equivalent to planting 50 hectares of trees, right? So it is not, you cannot say that it is nothing, right? Yeah, global scale, it might not be that much, but it is 50 hectares of trees, and given that the size of the data doubles every few years, so basically the size of the data increases exponentially, the savings that you are introducing by using an efficient technology is going to be exponential as well.